Hi guys, and welcome back to the Crawl Room. We're here once again in the wonderful ranty room of all things Formula 1. And we come to a close of the triple header, ending it at Hungary. And wow, I need a week off, and I'm sure the teams and mechanics do as well, especially the drivers. And of course, those certain mechanics involved with the Red Bull team there. Max Verstappen not doing very well at the start, was he? But we'll get into him a bit later on. But of course, this is normally the first segment before we get going. It's normally Karen Corner or Keith of the Week. Now, as a result of things that have been happening on Twitter and social media within the F1 community, I thought, let's not go slagging people off. It's not really the right thing to do at this moment in time. So I thought instead, I'm going to share a little meme that someone put up. And I thought, yeah, it made me laugh. So I'm going to share it right here, right now. And there you go. Someone's doctored Nico Rosberg with a little board that says he jumped the start. I did do titter at that, so I really laughed at that, to be honest, yeah. So just a bit of lightheartedness there. But did he jump the start? We'll find out from a certain someone a bit later on. So if you've never seen this series before, we're going to rate the drivers out of 10. We're going to score 10 for the highest, 0 for the worst performance. If you have an impeccable race, I'll give you bonus points. If you have a really bad race, I'll give you minus points, and it's as simple as that. So we're going to kick things off with the race winner, of course, and who's it going to be? Of course, it's Lewis Hamilton. Yet another dominant performance by that Mercedes team, in the hands of Hamilton anyway, let's say. But what can we say about Hamilton? Pole by a 10th over his teammate Bottas, which was a worthy effort, and then in the race he had a pit stop in hand to come in the last few laps to put the softs on and go get fastest lap while he was in traffic as well, of all things. He got held up by Perez on the last corner and still set fastest lap on those soft tyres. That was unbelievable. Making those mediums stretch out for as long as he did as well. Charles Leclerc was on the hard tyres and he'd stopped the same time as Hamilton, and he was dead. His tyres were dead on the hards, but Hamilton made those mediums last forever. Impeccable drive. With the car helps, but of course the driver is a big part of it as well. You absolutely cannot discredit Hamilton for what he did this weekend. Once again, a fantastic performance. Yeah, Bottas didn't have the measure of him at all once again. A 10th in qualifying is neither here nor there, but it's still a grid spot, and Hamilton still had the measure of him. And in the race, we know what happened to Bottas, and yeah, tough shit for him. But yeah, Hamilton, unbelievable. So I'm going to give him 10 points. Now, I did give him bonus points at Austria, well, a bonus point, but that was because he was 1.2 seconds faster than anyone else in qualifying, so that deserves an extra point. But for having the fastest car and dominating with the fastest car, that's 10 points. I need to see something absolutely outstandingly impeccable and, like, almost god tier like. I mean, he made them mediums last for a while, but the DAS system helps with that by wearing the inner and outer edges of the tyre carcass that other cars can't do. So I'm going to give him 10, and yeah, I need some really massive, mighty performances from the Mercedes drivers for them to start getting bonus points now. Then we come to Max Verstappen, and what can be said about him? I said his mechanics could do with the rest. Well, they certainly got the reward with Max Verstappen crossing the line P2. He crashed on the reconnaissance lap, where that's prior to the formation lap. It's prior to the start of the race. You just come out of the pits, do a lap of the circuit, form up, the team make the final checks, you probably go for a piss before the race starts, and then you go. And he binned it, stuffed it into the wall, took his front nose clean off, and he damaged his front left suspension, and his mechanics worked effortlessly. Apparently, according to someone that was down there in the paddock, they had 20 seconds left to spare before they had to clear the grid, before they actually were like, yep, clear, go, get it done, it's done, and they bolted the tyre on and left the grid. So an impeccable performance by the Red Bull team. And Verstappen, apart from that mistake, did an amazing job to finish P2. Starting P7, he didn't get his first quali lap together just quite right. And then in the second qualifying lap, it looked like the times had dropped off on the circuit anyway. But he also said over the team radio in the pits, is that it for us? And they did have some kind of mechanical issue. So it was possibly off the pace as well. So P7 wasn't the potential of the car. But they were going to struggle to get ahead of those racing points anyway. So what do I give Max Verstappen? His qualifying performance was okay. It wasn't fantastic. I think he'd have probably hoped for maybe P5 at best, behind the Mercedes and the racing points. So P7 wasn't too great, but as I mentioned, a little bit of a problem with that car. In the race, he did a solid job. He's the only guy taking it to the Mercedes. And when I say taking it to the Mercedes, I just mean Bottas. But nonetheless is the only one that's offering any sort of remote excitement up front. So fair play for that, Max. And a P2, a solid effort, and well done for rewarding your team with that as well. They deserved it. I am going to, however, just score you 8 points. Due to the fact that your qualifying wasn't quite there. Like I say, I think P5 would have been more realistic and probably the best you could have got. And of course, crashing before the race even begins isn't a good look. So I'm going to have to be harsh. It's called the Cruel Room, and I think 8 points is fair. It was a brilliant race. Had you not had that mistake, I'd have probably given you 9, but you did. So 8 points I think is fair. Then we come to Valtteri Bottas, and what can we say about him? Now, before we actually say about him, we need some SAR. We need a Sandra-assisted review on whether she thinks that that was a jump start or not. So let's go to her now. Sandra, was that a jump start?
Yes.
Thanks, Sandra. Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. As always, her word is final, and I do tend to agree with her. Yes, that was a drive-through penalty. All this bullshit that people said, well, he stopped and then started again, so it's fine. No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. It doesn't matter if you lose out either. If you jump the start, you have jumped the start. That is a penalty. Whether it be a 5-second time penalty, like what they did Raikkonen for it being out of position, or whether it be a drive-through. Whatever the penalty is for jumping the start, you should get it. Regardless of whether you've shot off into the distance and gained 14 places and you're leading like a Maldonado back in 2012 Belgium Grand Prix, or whether you've jumped the start, stopped and gone again and lost out a load of places, it's still a jump start. You went before the lights went out. So yes, for me, that was poor form by the FIA to allow that to happen. Not great at all. Some people said, well, maybe he didn't quite drive out of his grid box. I don't care. I don't care. He moved. He moved before the lights went out. That is a clear-cut penalty. But, you know, Mercedes will let him off. I reckon Toto Wolff was round at the FIA with a big fat checkbook going, oh no, please don't, how much do I write this out for, please don't. But as for the race itself, it was shite. He dropped down to 7th at the lowest point, struggled to get past Lance Stroll for quite a number of laps in the racing point. Apologies, B-Tech Mercedes. But yeah, overall, it was a disappointing race. He finished 3rd. He was less than a second behind Max on the final lap, but didn't get past him. And yeah, he's in the best car on the grid by a mile, by a country mile. So the cruel wall is going to get cruel, and I'm only going to score Bottas 2 points. Because that is a crap performance for a car that's able to do that. Okay, you're bogged down at the start, but it shouldn't take you that long to get through the pack when you're qualifying a full second a lap faster than the rest of the field in qualifying. You know, it shouldn't have that issue. So I'm sorry, but it's only 2 points for Valtteri Bottas. Then we come to Lance Stroll, and oh dear, I look like a bit of a dick after I slated him last weekend, didn't I? Ah, dear me, but what can we say for Lance? A fantastic effort. Qualified P3 ahead of Checo, best of the rest. Yeah, he did a solid job. He was running 3rd for most of the race, and then obviously after Verstappen got through on the first lap and then Bottas finally came through, then that put him into 4th, and that was the best he could have ever hoped for, and that's what he got. He didn't put a wheel wrong, and well impressed with him actually this weekend. I really am. Perez was nowhere. Perez dropped down the order, then sort of came up a bit and then slid down a little bit. So he was up and down, but he was nowhere near Stroll, and the qualifying pace should have meant that they were 4th and 5th easily. But they weren't, and Stroll did a solid job picking up 12 points in that racing point. I don't really have much to say about him, to be honest, because it was just a fantastic race, and I don't know how I can say it any better than that. So for that reason, I'm going to give Stroll 10 points. Then we come to the curious case of Alex Albon. What can we say about Alex? It was a bit of a strange one with him. The qualifying didn't go to plan, qualifying P13 behind the Williams. And then in the race, he solidly made his way through. He was quiet at times, you know, he was just plodding his way up, picking one off at a time. Yeah, finishing P5, which is a fantastic effort. Getting past Vettel after attacking him for a few laps within the last 2 laps as Vettel went a little bit wide at turn 2. And P5 is a solid effort. It's just really weird what's going on at Red Bull at the moment. Albon was understandably annoyed in qualifying when he said, why did you put me out in traffic? And then of course George Russell even backed him up and said, what is going on? They're making him look like an idiot in the press conference, saying Alex shouldn't be like this. And I tend to agree, that second car has not looked good. It's never looked good. But this was a better race this weekend, I feel, for Alex than it was last weekend at Styria. The qualifying wasn't there, but again, I'm not convinced that that car's fully there, you know. I know everything's built around Max. I know the Red Bull team is built around Max. That's the whole reason why Daniil Ricciardo left the team. But I just can't see it. I just can't see where the issue lies, because the Red Bulls need both cars up there. And that second car's just not delivering for whatever reason at the moment. But nonetheless, P5, a solid effort. Well done, Albon. Climbed your way back through the field. And I'm going to give you a solid 8 points for that. I think that was a worthy drive. Next up is Sebastian Vettel, finishing P6. And what can be said about Sebastian Vettel? Qualifying P5, a solid effort. And finishing P6, solid effort again. It was a good weekend by Vettel this weekend, considering everything that's happened in the previous weeks. Both cars got through into Q3, which is the first time that's happened this season. And Vettel looked like he had form. He was keeping up the pace. The tyre deg wasn't too bad with his car. And it looked like it was doing all right. Maybe he could have held Albon off for that P5 finish had he not just made that mistake and run wide at turn 2. But despite that, it was a perfect weekend by him for a Ferrari that is clearly struggling with its engine performance and a team that hasn't got a clue what it's doing. So, for that reason, Sebastian Vettel, I'm going to score him 9 points. I think that was a solid drive. That was the best he could have done, nearly. I think P5 was definitely possible if he had not made the mistake, but maybe Albon would have got him in the DRS the lap later, but we'll never know. He made it a bit too easy for Albon. So that's the reason why I docked the point off there. But overall, a great race. Then we come to Sergio Perez finishing P7, and yeah, that was shy. That was a poor race by Sergio Perez, I'm afraid to say there. He qualified P4, so didn't quite catch his teammate in qualifying, finishing in one position behind him. And then in the race, just lost it. He dropped down to P10 at one stage, at the lowest point, and then just slowly clambered his way back up to P6, and then I think he lost out again to Albon and dropped back down to P7. And yeah, overall, considering where Stroll is, and they're in identical cars, you know, Stroll's there getting 12 points, you're only there getting 6. You should have been up there with him, really. You should have been up there for support. I don't mind if you finish behind him by a position, because at the end of the day, you can't finish side by side and take the same place. But you should have been up there with him. The racing points were never in the same shot as each other after the start, because he dropped back, Stroll went forward. So, yeah, for that reason, Perez, I'm going to give you just 3 points. That was a poor race. It was a poor race, it's the cruel room, and in comparison to your less experienced teammate who I've slated for quite a while now, that was crap. Then we come to Daniil Ricciardo in the Renault, the Lone Ranger this weekend. Didn't really see much of him, but he was running his own race and just slowly making his way up the field. He qualified outside the Q3 times. He ended up in P12, I believe it was. And yeah, he slowly made his way up from there, really, but didn't see much of him. He ended up P8. You know, he picked up some points for Renault, which is okay. You know, P8, the Renault clearly hasn't got the pace to match the racing points, but he outraced both McLarens this weekend, so that's a worthy note. And was on the back of Leclerc as well at places, and outraced him in the end as well. So, all in all for Ricciardo, an okay weekend. It's a shame I didn't see more of you, because I'm sure you did some good overtakes at some point, or maybe you even just made them all in the pit stops. Who knows? But overall, a solid enough weekend to pick up some more points for Renault, and you did keep it clean and tidy, and you kept the measure of your teammate by a long margin this weekend again. So for that reason, Daniil Ricciardo, I'm going to score him 7 points. I would have been a little bit harsh on him just because I didn't really see how much he did, but just slowly made his way up into the top 10 and did what counted, really. He picked up the points. So yeah, 7 points for Daniil Ricciardo. Then we come to Kevin Magnussen, K-Mag, the mighty K-Mag himself. We are the champions, my friends. And it certainly will feel like a championship and a win for Haas, because they looked absolutely dire in the first 2 rounds this season. And for K-Mag to finish P9 on a fantastic strategy and picking up 2 crucial points for their championship battle is a worthy cause. K-Mag did a solid job. They started out on the full wet tyres on the formation lap and pitted and put mediums on in the pit lane. So they started effectively from pit lane start. And then when everyone else came in to put the dry tyres on after their inters had burnt out and the track was drying, the Haasers were up to P3 and P4 for a long while in that race before eventually slipping down. Then both Haasers put the hard tyres on, And yeah, they just slowly trickled down the order from there, really. The overall pace wasn't there. People doing faster strategies with their stops and stuff. The cars around them were a lot faster. But for K-Mag to hold on to P9 was a brilliant effort, a mighty effort. It is worth mentioning as well that Grosjean did play a good rear gunner in that situation to ensure that the gap was met between K-Mag and Grosjean, so they had to battle through Grosjean first before they got to K-Mag, and that really did help. But K-Mag, impeccable performance. Haas, brilliant strategy. You did all you could to pick up some points. It's a shame Grosjean wasn't behind him in P10, but overall, a fantastic, fantastic effort, Haas. And for that reason, K-Mag, I'm going to score him 10 points. The last of the points finishers is, of course, Carlos Sainz, picking up one solitary World Championship point for McLaren's cause. And that is disappointing. It's disappointing to see. Looking back at the previous two races, we've gone, wow, look at McLaren, aren't they good? They've come here this weekend, qualified P8 and P9. Sainz getting out qualified by Norris by one position. And then they both slipped back in the race start and then never really made it back up again. And it was only in the latter stages that Sainz made the move on Leclerc that was on dead hard tyres as to why he got a point. So a disappointing race weekend by McLaren in all. They did say prior to the weekend starting that they looked like they were going to struggle. But I thought struggling was going to be a double points finish and probably finishing 8th or 9th. But not just scraping 1 point. I thought that is really tough. And of course, Racing Point with their race this weekend have made a massive dent in the Constructors' title as well. It's early days yet, of course, but you know, they've picked up and made all this ground in the first two races and they've just lost it all in this one. Absolutely crazy. So for Sainz, I'm just going to score him a middle of the road 4. I changed my mind as I was speaking then. It's my series, do what I want. Just basically because he was outperformed in qualifying by Norris once again. And in the race, didn't really have much to offer, unfortunately. Picked up the final point in the latter stages. It wasn't a good race by McLaren at all this weekend, though. So the 4 points really does reflect the McLaren pace as opposed to the driver's pace. Sainz did all he could, but 4 points is all he really deserves. Then we come to Charles Leclerc, as mentioned, battling with Sainz for that crucial final point at the end, but it wasn't to be for Charles. His strategy really screwed him over. I think, to be honest with you, judging by how the early part of the race looked, he would have been where Vettel was, potentially P5, P6, P7 in that area, had it not been for the strategy cock-up, which was them pitting and putting Charles on the soft tyres while everyone else around him went mediums or hards in some cases. So unfortunately for Charles, he had to make a lot earlier stop than all the other cars to put the hard tyres on to get him to the end. They didn't want to pit him again, and he just pretty much did all he could, drove around and tried clinging on to that final point as much as he could. But in the end, the tyres had cried enough, and that was it. Gonzo. So yeah, unfortunately I do blame the Ferrari strategy for that as more than Leclerc. Leclerc did all he could really, but when you've got, you know, Vettel up there scoring the points, I think Ferrari potentially were better than McLaren this weekend, as proved in qualifying. So in the race, even with the bad strategy, I just kind of hope if he'd have got in the points at least, but it didn't. So for that reason, I'm just going to score him in the middle of the road, 5 points. Then we come to P12, and these cars have not been seen by anyone in the wild, I'm convinced. The AlphaTauri of Daniil Kvyat, P12. Did anyone see them? I know we saw Gasly retire in the pits, but has anyone actually seen any race footage of them at all these first 3 rounds, or am I just missing something? Because they're never shown. Once again for Kvyat, difficult to judge his race because I never saw him. I didn't see what he was capable of. I saw a couple of times where he popped up above like the likes of Giovinazzi and Raikkonen, but I didn't really know how he got down there. I assume it was a pit stop. But yeah, P12 in all, I'm thinking that's a solid result, to be honest with you. Like I say, it's difficult to judge, and I try and look into these races as much as I can, and I look at the pit stop strategies that people have done, and I try and look at the tweets that all the teams are putting up, but I just see nothing for AlphaTauri ever. So I don't know if it's harsh or not, but I'm just going to give him 6 points. I think it was a good race, but if I remember rightly, he was behind Gasly, and then Gasly started tumbling down, but that was only like a couple of laps prior to Gasly's retirement. So all in all, I reckon Gasly's car was burning itself to bits at that point anyway. So yeah, you know, AlphaTauri he was out in Q1, so I think that's a reason why I'm going to score him 6 as well, because you know Gasly got through into Q3 with a car with a problem. and Kvyat didn't. He was out in Q1. So for that reason, 6 points I think is fair, because he came down from the back of the grid and managed to finish P12 just behind Leclerc. But how he did that, I've no idea. Then we come to Lando Norris. What a shame for Lando. A quiet race, another one that slipped down the order massively at the start of the race. He went from P8 to P15 and then just kind of stayed there and didn't do much. And finished P13, overtaking Ocon in the latter laps. Yeah. A poor race compared to what he had been doing the previous races. Outraced by his teammate Sainz, who picked up a point. And, yeah, a poor weekend for McLaren, really. Again, I'm thinking I'm blaming the car more than the drivers, because both of them to be that far off the pace. Clearly, the changeable conditions doesn't work well with the McLaren. It seems to be now. But overall, a poor race by Lando standards, and we didn't see the Lando last lap like we normally do. Scenario 7, boys. Scenario 7. Didn't happen, did it? So for that reason, I only gave Sainz 4 points. I'm only going to give Lando Norris 3, because, yeah, poor race. Just a poor race. Then we come to Esteban Ocon finishing P14 in the Renault, and yeah, Ricciardo had the measure of him in qualifying, and then in the race, didn't see anything of Ocon whatsoever. Didn't see a sausage of him, apart from when Norris finally got past him. So P14, it's like the first race again, isn't it? At Austria, the first Austrian one, where Ocon was very quiet, didn't really show his pace compared to Ricciardo. We thought we'd seen an improvement at Styria, but then we got here, and again, it's just off the pace. So, unfortunately for that reason, Ocon, I'm only going to score you 4 points. Yeah, I know the Renault's bad, and I know it's a bad car, but you look at where Ricciardo was in comparison to Ocon, I think 4 points is fair. Then we come to Romain Grosjean finishing P15 on the same strategy as K-Mag. So came in on the formation lap, put the mediums on, went out, got as high as 4th, tumbled down the order, put hard tyres on, got sorted back into the points again, and then eventually just tumbled all the way down, unfortunately. I'm going to say it now, though, I think, to be honest, it was part of Haas's strategy to maybe use Grosjean as a bit of a buffer between him and K-Mag to get one car into the points. I'm not saying by any means Grosjean was sacrificed by the team, because I'm sure they would have absolutely loved both cars to have finished in the points, and I'm sure that's what Grosjean would have wanted as well. But when the gap sort of got to about 8-9 seconds between the two Haas's, Grosjean did play a really good back marker in terms of holding everyone up behind, making them battle to get around him, and then after they did get released, they then got a further 9 seconds to catch up by K-Mag. So I think for that reason, you know, Grosjean did a solid job in that respect, but didn't have the measure of his teammate. Both cars out in Q1 as mentioned. Again, that's the Ferrari engine. The Haas are thrilled that K-Mag got points, obviously. So for that reason, for Romain Grosjean, I'm going to score him a solid 6 points. Unfortunately didn't get the points and didn't have the measure of his teammate. It would have been nice to see him in P10, or maybe a little bit further up the order, considering K-Mag finished 9th, Grosjean ended up 15th. So, you know, even if he'd have finished 11th or 12th, I think that would have been certainly a lot more respectable. So just 6 points for Grosjean. I commend the effort he did. I'm not criticising his race performance whatsoever. I'm not criticising Haas's strategy at all. But it'd have been nice for him to have been the lead Haas, and we'd have seen how it had played out then, because I reckon K-Mag would have been a lot closer to Grosjean had it been the other way around. Then we come to Kimi Raikkonen lining incorrectly up on his grid spot and getting a 5-second time penalty added to his time, but didn't affect his race performance overall, finishing P16. And again, that Alpha car, it's just not good with the engine in the back of it, is it, unfortunately? It was looking strong, though, to be fair to him, in the early stages. After that first stop from Inters onto the medium tyres, it was as high as P11 at one point, and went really long on the mediums before eventually stopping for the hard tyres, and then just lost all pace and just gently tumbled down the order. Yeah, it wasn't to be really for him. The 5-second time penalty didn't affect his race position as mentioned, finishing P16, well clear of his teammate Giovinazzi. Neither car out in Q1 in qualifying, and rounding out in P16 and P17, and they're lined up on the back row of the grid, P19 and P20, so disappointing in that respect. And yeah, sadly for Kimi Raikkonen, all I'm going to have to score him is just a middle of the road 5 points. Did have some good flashes of the race, as I mentioned, getting as high up as P11, but overall, it's just a poor car and it's just so difficult to judge him. But comparing him against his teammate, he did the better job. 5 points. And then, of course, we do come to Antonio Giovinazzi. Kimi Raikkonen's teammate, of course, and as mentioned, another lonely race for him and the Alpha team in general, really. Engine is shite. But unfortunately, this weekend, Antonio Raikkonen did have the measure of you in qualifying and in the race. And again, not much to say about him, just a lonely, lonely race, sadly. So yeah, I gave Kimi a middle of the road 5 points, and for Antonio, I'm only going to give him 4 points, sadly. It was a poor race, wasn't fantastic, didn't really get up in the mix at all for the points like Kimi at least tried to do. Unfortunately, it was one step too far for Giovinazzi, and he just stayed remotely at the back of the grid. Unfortunate with the pit strategy, of course, he went for the soft tyres, and it didn't work out, like Leclerc, and that left him lingering around at the back. So I do blame strategy a bit for that, but Kimi Raikkonen had the measure of you nonetheless. So yeah, 4 points for Antonio. And then unfortunately we come to the two Williams boys, and after so much promising qualifying, with George Russell qualifying P12 and Nick Latifi getting through into P15, both through into Q2, and I believe that's for the first time since Monza 2018, so over 2 years really. Yeah, and then in the race it just didn't happen for him, did it? Latifi had a brilliant effort though at the start, without a doubt, up into P10. George Russell slipped back unfortunately down into P16. And then in the race, the pair of them, it just came unstuck. Latifi had an unsafe pit release and he tagged the front wing of Sainz on pit lane exit. And unfortunately picked up a rear puncture coming out the pit, spun, and had to do an entire lap with a left rear tyre flat as a fart and shredding itself to bits. And that put him one whole lap down before the race had even really got going, to be honest. And as for George Russell, who will be racing first because he did finish ahead of his teammate, it was a lonely race for George, really. They went for the soft tyres, as did most of the back mark of the field, expecting rain that didn't come. So then he had to put the hard tyres on and go a long way on those, but didn't even finish ahead of the Alphas, which is poor form for the Williams. And they should have the measure of the Alphas with, of course, that Ferrari engine in the back of it. They've got Mercedes in the back of that Williams, and it just came unstuck for the pair of them, which was just such a shame. So for George Russell, I'm just going to score him 4 points. The qualifying was fantastic, don't get me wrong. We saw that from you last weekend as well. But last weekend amounted to nothing either, and I was less critical of you then. But this weekend, I've got to be more critical. Yes, again, I know the soft tyre strategy wasn't the best option, but he should have been ahead of those Alphas and possibly even Grosjean, because Grosjean was falling back by a mile in the latter half of the race. So, yeah, unfortunate for George there. So just 4 points for him. And for Nicholas Latifi, I'm going to award him just 3 points because, you know, again, the qualifying was good, into Q2, fantastic. But in the race, I don't blame the pit stop either. The pit stop wasn't his fault. The pit release wasn't his fault. He wouldn't have seen Sainz. I don't blame him going a lap down with that incident at all. That wasn't his fault. But he also had a spin and a slide, didn't he? Off at turn 4, was that? At the exit of turn 5, I think it was actually, and slid off there and lost a lot of time. And just generally miles off the pace of George Russell in the race. And I think even Russell lapped him as well. I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure it was Russell that put a lap on him as well. And Latifi, the only driver, finishing 3 laps down. Again, I know that's as a result of the earlier contact at the pit lane exit. But just 3 points for Nicholas Latifi. And last but by no means least, the only retirement this race, and it had to be Pierre Gasly, didn't it? Had to be Pierre Gasly. The weekend from hell for him, but he did so much. He did all he could this weekend, and it just wasn't to be. If your luck's not in, your luck's not in with Pierre, and I feel so sorry for him. He did a mighty effort. In free practice 1, he didn't get any laps in because of a sensor issue. Free practice 2, it pissed it down. He only did a few laps. FP3, it was reporting a problem again. The problem resurrected itself back again in qualifying. In as early as Q1, he was saying, this car's got a problem, guys. I think we need to stop. And they were like, no, keep pushing, keep pushing. He got into Q2. He's like, right, guys, we nearly need to stop now. And he got into Q3, finishing P10, and fantastic effort, and then set no time in Q3 because the problem was there and it did arise too much. And then in the race, he did slip down initially off the line. He dropped down to around P12, and then when the problem started to arise, he stumbled down to 14th, and then eventually boxed, and the car was smelling of burning plastic, and something had gone majorly wrong with that car. And yeah, unfortunate really. Gasly did everything right this weekend. Maybe points were possible. But we're never going to know because his race weekend were just a complete write-off. But for his race performance that we saw of it, and for his qualifying performance that was impeccable with the problem with the car. I'm going to award him a solid 8 points, and I think he deserves that. There you go, guys. That was the runners and riders for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down below. As always, did I score any too high, any too low? Let me know in the comments below your thoughts and feedback on the race, and your thoughts and feedback on the scores I've given. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time for the Silverstone British Grand Prix. So see you then. Much love.